When you think of the cross, what image immediately springs to mind for you? A specific shape, maybe a particular color.
Yeah, probably the traditional one we see everywhere.
Right. But what if that familiar image isn't the complete picture, maybe even the most essential part of what it represents?
Mm.
Today, we're taking a deep dive into an audio recording that kind of invites us to reconsider our assumptions about the cross, explore one of history's most profound cries, and uncover a powerful message about faith. Faith in the face of silence.
That silence piece is key.
Exactly. And this deep dive is custom tailored for you, designed to give you a fresh, maybe even surprising perspective on a concept many of us think we know well.
And our mission, really, is to pull out the crucial insights from this material. We're looking at the meaning of suffering, the nature of faith itself, and, like you said, the surprising, sometimes difficult role of silence in how we understand the divine.
Yeah.
We'll help you unpack what's most important here, aiming for those, aha moments without just drowning you in information.
Okay, great. So let's jump right in. Our source opens with something pretty unexpected, actually. An anecdote about a church. A church that, well, found itself without a physical cross. Not inside, not outside, just brick where you might expect one. How did that happen?
Well, it wasn't like an act of denial. They weren't saying the cross isn't important, not at all.
Okay.
It was more about questioning the necessity of having that specific traditional red cross shape physically there.
Oh.
And it brings up an interesting point, actually, that for some reformist traditions, the focus shifted away from having lots of prominent symbols outside.
Yeah, more internal.
Exactly, prioritizing internal faith over the outward display. So the question for them became, do we absolutely need that specific image for this building to be a church?
That's a really thought-provoking place to start, especially when you think about Jesus' own words. He said, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. So, okay, if Jesus said we have to take up our cross, what does that imply about the kind of cross we should be bearing today? Is it a physical thing or something else?
And that really gets to the heart of it, doesn't it? The cross we must bear today. Well, it isn't the literal wooden beam Jesus carried up the hill.
Right.
The real emphasis, and this is what our source highlights, is on the meaning behind the cross. The personal struggle, the daily commitment, the suffering sometimes. It's about bearing your own cross. That's very different from just a static symbol.
Yeah, that makes sense. And how did people, visitors react to this church without a cross? The source mentions it was kind of a mixed bag.
It really was. Reactions apparently ranged from good, people maybe appreciated the lack of clutter, to just strange.
Strange, huh?
Yeah. Some, like the absence, maybe felt it focused the mind differently, while others just found it, well, peculiar. It seems the lack of the symbol was almost as powerful as its presence might have been. Absolutely. Because the absence of that familiar symbol can actually force you into a deeper reflection.
Yeah.
Like, okay, if the object isn't here, what does it truly represent?
It prompts the question.
Exactly. It makes you ask.
Yeah.
And the source even suggests that maybe that simple brick block where the cross could have been, maybe that symbolizes the cross of this era for each person. A space waiting for your personal meaning.
Wow, that's a powerful way to think about it. Shifting from the external symbol to a really personal, internal meaning. And, well, that thinking leads us right to the core of the cross, doesn't it? The actual moment of Jesus' crucifixion.
Yeah, the event itself.
So let's focus on arguably one of the most agonizing moments from Good Friday. Jesus' cry from the cross, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. My God, why have you forsaken me? When you hear those words, what does that bring up for you?
Oh, it's just so raw, isn't it? Such a powerful cry. I think for many, the immediate reaction is just deep pain, maybe abandonment. You wonder, was Jesus, even as the Son of God, expressing that very human feeling of being utterly alone? Or, as some traditions might argue, was it something else? Maybe not a complaint in the way we think of it. It's definitely a moment that makes you wrestle with things.
It really does. And what's particularly striking, according to our source material, is that this cry is one of the 7 last words, right? The sayings from the cross. But Matthew's gospel records only this single phrase, just this one. Why would Matthew choose to highlight this cry out of all 7? That feels like a very deliberate choice.
It's a crucial detail, absolutely. And the powerful connection here, the thing that unlocks it, is that, my God, why have you forsaken me, is a direct quote. That's verse 1 of Psalm 22. So Jesus, in his final moments, wasn't just crying out randomly. He was actually reciting this psalm. a formal, deeply significant prayer for Jews. I mean, think about it. Even today, Jewish synagogue services use songs for what, about half their prayers?
Right.
So Jesus, even in agony, was rooted in Scripture. He was praying.
So Matthew wasn't just recording a cry of despair. He was framing Jesus' entire death through the lens of Psalm 22. He saw it as prophecy being fulfilled.
Precisely. Matthew seems to have painstakingly recorded these details because he saw the events unfolding exactly as Psalm 22 described centuries before.
Like what kind of details?
Well, for instance, Psalm 22 verses 7 and 8 describe mockers saying things like, "He trusts in the Lord, let the Lord rescue him."
Wow.
Which lines up perfectly with the crowd at the cross, doesn't it? And some of them even ironically misunderstood Jesus' Eli as him calling for the prophet Elijah.
Right, I remember that detail.
And another chilling one is Psalm 22.18, which says, "They divide my clothes among them and cast lots for my garment." And that's exactly what the soldiers did, as Matthew records in chapter 27.
So it was like watching a script unfold.
In a way, yes. A divine script foretold long ago.
So, okay, if Jesus was praying a psalm, the whole psalm, implicitly, not just the first line,
Yeah.
what does that tell us about his state of mind? That changes the whole feeling of that moment, doesn't it?
It absolutely does, because when you read all of Psalm 22, yes, it starts with that cry of desperation, describing someone in the absolute worst situation, facing death, but still clinging to God. But then, and this is the crucial part, the second half of the psalm, from about verse 22 onwards, it shifts dramatically.
How so?
It moves from lament into expressions of assurance, gratitude, praise for God's eventual salvation. It ends in hope.
Wow.
So Jesus wasn't just crying out in despair. He was praying a prayer that, despite starting in darkness, ultimately points firmly towards hope and God's deliverance.
So even while dying, Jesus is praying a psalm that starts with, "Why have you forsaken me?" but ends with certainty of rescue and praise. That's profound.
It really is.
But, okay, digging deeper into Matthew's portrayal here, there's this other theme running underneath, maybe even more challenging, God's silence.
Yes. This is maybe the central and often uncomfortable point that the source raises. At the most critical moment, when Jesus, his own son, seems to need intervention the most, God is silent.
No booming voice, no rescue.
Nothing, just silence.
And this isn't just some abstract theological point from long ago. Our source shares these really compelling stories, anecdotes that show this is a universal thing, right? Experiencing God's silence when we suffer.
Absolutely.
It mentions the story of a German grandmother, lived a faithful life, but then loses her daughter in an accident. Her husband gets cancer. And she's asking, why? Why me? Where is God in all this? And then there's that other account, a personal one from the source, about losing 2 church members in Germany.
Yeah, the deacon and the pastor's wife, both to cancer.
Right. And apparently the church prayed fervently, collectively, but they still passed away, leading to this real disappointment and the question, why did God stay silent?
Yeah.
A miracle could have drawn people to faith, couldn't it?
It's that raw, painful question.
Well,
and it's stark, isn't it, when you contrast it? I mean, God had shown immense power through Jesus before.
Yeah, the feeding of the 5,000.
Right, with just a couple of fish and loaves. Or raising Lazarus.
After days in the tomb.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Demonstrable, undeniable power. Yet here, at the moment of Jesus' deepest agony, when help was arguably most needed, when the whole world, in a sense, was watching, just silence. Even for his own son.
Okay, but here's the pivot, right? The source says Matthew wasn't just pointing out God's silence. He was focusing on Jesus' attitude, his actions during that silence. What was it about Jesus' response?
Well, the suggestion is that Jesus' greatest pain wasn't only the, unimaginable physical torture of crucifixion.
Which must have been horrific.
Beyond comprehension. But maybe even deeper was that profound sense of God's apparent abandonment, that silence. And that, the source argues, resonates so deeply because it mirrors what many feel is the highest form of suffering, feeling utterly alone, like God just isn't there.
Yeah, I can see that. Yet despite that ultimate pain, that seeming absence of God stepping in, Jesus kept clinging to God, kept trusting the God who had been active in his life before, even when rescue looked impossible.
Exactly. That's the core of it. Why? Because the prayer he was praying was Psalm 22.
The one that ends in hope.
The one that concludes with absolute assurance of salvation and praise. Jesus' unwavering faith, it seems, believed that God's ultimate salvation would somehow transcend even death itself. He held on to the conviction that even if he died, God's promise wouldn't end there.
So, okay, what was the outcome, the result, the proof, maybe, of that profound, unwavering faith facing God's silence?
Well, The resurrection.
Yeah.
It served as the ultimate validation. The proof that Jesus' faith, his trust in God, wasn't misplaced. It was God's final resounding answer to that silence.
And the source really frames that powerfully, calling the resurrection the result of cross faith. Like, it's a promise, a blessing for those willing to bear their own cross. It even says, without the cross, the resurrection holds no meaning.
Which connects this whole thing directly back to you, the listener.
Yeah.
We celebrate Easter. Why? Because we believe the same God active in Jesus is still active in believers today. And that promise of resurrection, of ultimate vindication in life, extends to everyone who, like Jesus, chooses to trust God completely, even and maybe especially when God seems silent in their most desperate times.
Our source throws out a really provocative thought here, too. It says, God's silence, in a way, acts as a scale or measure
Right.
that reveals the true depth and nature of one's faith.
That's a counterintuitive way to look at silence, isn't it? No. Not just absence, but a measure.
It really is. And if you follow that logic, then God's silence in our lives, well, maybe that represents our cross in this era.
Okay, explain that.
It's not a physical thing we carry. It's those concrete situations, those times of profound suffering or confusion where God seems absent or he's quiet. That's our cross to bear.
Right.
And just as with Jesus, the resurrection, in whatever form that takes for us, ultimate vindication, renewed hope, deeper understanding that becomes God's eventual answer to our experience of silence. So what does this boil down to for you listening? Your cross isn't a physical object, is it? It's those real-life situations where God is silent and you're going through it, experiencing that deep suffering.
Exactly. And the message, the takeaway then, is maybe a call to deepen our intimacy or trust with God, to build that relationship so strongly that even when God is silent, that connection, that faith, remains unshaken.
Wow. That's a powerful deep dive. Really rethinking what it means to bear your cross and how to find faith, maybe even through moments of silence. I hope this whole exploration has given you a fresh perspective on, well, a very familiar story.
Yeah, definitely food for thought.
Yeah.
And maybe consider this as a final provocative idea. In your own life, when God seems silent, what specific situation, what struggle reveals itself as your cross right now? And what does unwavering trust look like for you right in the middle of that moment?
That's a good question to sit with. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep trusting.